Put that phone down now. The words sliced through the hallway before anyone even looked up. Every head turned toward the janitor in the gray uniform, standing frozen with a small flip phone in his hand. He wasn't scrolling. He wasn't laughing. He was just listening, eyes wide, voice trembling, as if the world on the other end was falling apart. The CEO's heels clicked closer, each step a warning. She was known for perfection. No excuses, no delays, no noise on the executive floor. To her, the ringing phone was disrespect, a reminder that someone somewhere wasn't following her rules. "During work hours you answer my calls, not yours," she said sharply. He opened his mouth. "Ma'am, please, save it. You're done here." Her tone didn't rise, it didn't need to. The silence that followed was worse. Security appeared before he could explain. One of them gently took the phone, trying to stop the call's faint echo. The janitor's face fell as if something inside him broke. He tried one last time. "It's not personal. Someone's in trouble." But the CEO turned away. "We all have trouble. You should have thought of that before answering." The guards escorted him down the corridor, his mop bucket rolling behind like an unwanted memory. The phone, still vibrating, slipped from his hand and landed near her shoes. For a second the CEO hesitated, the screen flashing an unknown number, a single word on it. "Help." She pressed end and set it on the counter. "Next time," she said to her assistant, "hire someone who knows boundaries." The assistant nodded, uneasy. The sound of that disconnected call lingered longer than it should have. And by the time the CEO walked back to her office, she didn't yet know the voice begging for help on that line wasn't a stranger's. It was her daughter's. She started her mornings like a ritual: coffee at precisely 6:15, inbox cleared before sunrise, schedule rehearsed like a script. Every second had a place, every emotion had a lock. Control was the only language she trusted now. 5 years had passed since her daughter disappeared, but the world around her never dared to mention it. People learned quickly that compassion made her uncomfortable. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted efficiency. In her world, feelings slowed progress, and progress was all she had left to fill the silence at home. Her office wall displayed awards and performance graphs, not family photos. The one frame that once held a picture of her daughter now sat in a drawer, face down. She told herself it was because she didn't want distractions, but the truth was simpler. She couldn't bear to see the eyes that once called her mom before vanishing into the unknown. Every employee on the executive floor moved carefully around her, polite smiles, straight backs, voices lowered to half volume. She never asked for respect, she commanded it. Yet beneath the polished surface was exhaustion, the kind that sleep couldn't touch. Even success had started to taste like ash. Downstairs, in the maintenance corridor that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and rain-soaked boots, another kind of order ruled. The janitor, Ravi, kept his world steady through small kindnesses. He arrived early, long before anyone else, not for praise but for peace. Every corridor he mopped, every light he fixed, felt like restoring a small corner of balance in a world that had forgotten gentleness. At home, his wife lay in bed most days, her breathing soft but shallow. The medication cost more than his monthly rent, but he managed patching old shoes, skipping lunches, smiling through hunger. He never complained. Some nights he'd whisper to her sleeping form, "It's okay, Mina. One day it'll get easier." But even he didn't always believe it. He had worked in that building for 12 years, long enough to know everyone's habits, who left their coffee half full, who always forgot their keys, who cried quietly in the restroom after bad meetings. He never judged, he just cleaned up and pretended he hadn't noticed. That was his version of kindness, the invisible kind. Every morning he saw the CEO's reflection in the elevator glass as she passed, always composed, always unreachable. She'd nod slightly, not out of warmth but routine, and he'd respond with a quiet, "Good morning, ma'am." Two worlds touching only in silence. When she fired him that day, it wasn't the first time she'd spoken sharply, but it was the first time he saw fear behind her anger, a flicker quick and buried, like she was punishing something more than just his mistake. To her, the phone ringing had been noise, a break in discipline. To him it had been a plea. He couldn't explain that the voice on the line had sounded like someone on the edge of the world. After he left, she returned to her glass office, and for the first time in years she didn't dive straight into work. She just stood there staring at the silent phone she'd disconnected. Something about that word, help, refused to fade. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was memory, but somewhere deep down, beneath the armor of control, The wound she'd buried for 5 years began to stir again. Quiet, persistent, alive. And on another floor, in a small rented room lit by a single bulb, Ravi whispered to himself while replaying the moment in his mind. I should have answered sooner. 2 lives, one built on control, the other on compassion, had collided for the first time. Neither knew yet that the call she ended was the thread pulling them both toward the truth they'd been running from. The same word echoed in both hearts that night. Help. Though each heard it differently. For her it was a ghost. For him it was a promise. And neither could shake the feeling that the story between them wasn't over yet. The email came just after midnight. The CEO was still in her office. She always was, bathed in the dull glow of her monitor, reviewing quarterly figures that no longer meant anything to her. The subject line was strange. You should have listened. For a second, she thought it was spam. Then she saw the attachment, an audio file titled Call Unknown Dwag. She hesitated. The sound of her own heartbeat filled the quiet. When she pressed play, the static cracked like distant thunder. And then came the voice. The young girl. Shaking. Breathing fast. Please, please, someone, help me. I don't know where I am. It's dark. The words cut off with a rustle, like a phone being snatched away. Then silence. Her hand froze over the mouse. That voice. That tone. The break before the word please. The way the L in help lingered. It wasn't just familiar. It was hers. Her daughter's. The chair creaked as she stood up, the breath leaving her body all at once. She played it again, and again. Same desperation. Same tremor. She closed her eyes, and in that moment the years collapsed. The police reports, the empty rooms, the headlines that said missing teenager still unfound. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't. Her daughter was gone. Everyone said so. The case had gone cold, the hope long buried under paperwork and blame. But what if? Her trembling fingers searched the email header, scanning IP traces, domains, anything that made sense. It was anonymous, routed through a dozen servers. No name, no source, just one cryptic line in the message body. You fired the only person who listened. She stared at the sentence until the words blurred. The janitor. For the first time her confidence fractured. She had dismissed him like a noise she didn't want to hear. But the thought wouldn't leave her. Why would someone link that voice to him? How would they even know? On impulse she called HR. The clock on the wall read 12:47 a.m. The HR head, half asleep, answered. Ma'am? Is everything all right? Send me Ravi's file, she said. He hesitated. The janitor, the one you terminated. Yes. Now. Her tone left no space for questions. While she waited, she opened her personal browser, something she rarely did, and typed in the number from the audio file metadata. It wasn't listed. A disposable SIM, maybe, the kind used by people who didn't want to be found. And in that moment she realized, neither did her daughter. Across town, Ravi sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the eviction notice taped to the wall. His wife slept in the corner, her medicine bottles lined up like soldiers. He replayed the day in his mind, the sharp words, the humiliation, the helplessness. He had been fired before, once, long ago when his mother fell ill. But this one hurt differently, not because of pride but because of that voice. He could still hear it. Please. I'm scared. He hadn't even said anything in return before the phone was yanked away. The fear in that voice had felt real, too real. Maybe that's why he froze. He didn't want to be another person who ignored someone begging for help. He took out his small prepaid phone and scrolled to the call log. The number was still there, but redialing it led to a dead tone. He tried again and again. Nothing. His colleagues had already started whispering. Some said he argued with the CEO. Others said he stole company property. It didn't matter now. Tomorrow he'd start looking for another job. Maybe smaller, maybe dirtier, but he'd keep working. He always did. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about that call wasn't over. Back in her penthouse apartment, the CEO opened the HR file. Ravi Singh, age 52, employed 12 years. No complaints, no disciplinary record. References from previous employers described him as quiet, reliable, kind. Her stomach twisted. She had never looked at this file before. She leaned back, rubbing her temples, and whispered to the empty room.
What did you hear, Ravi?
The screen dimmed from inactivity, but the sound of the girl's voice still echoed inside her, overlapping with memories she'd fought to bury. The day her daughter's room went quiet, the Nenan's calls, the police officer who said we'll keep trying. And now, years later, another call she hadn't answered. She minimized the file and opened the recording again. The final 2 seconds she hadn't noticed before, faint, almost drowned in static. A whisper after the plea. A single word. Her daughter's childhood nickname. The mug in her hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Somewhere between disbelief and hope her mind raced. If that voice was real, if that call came from someone still alive, she couldn't stay silent. Not again. At dawn she drafted an internal note, not about profit margins, but about retrieving deleted call logs from company servers. Officially it was security review. Privately it was something else. A reopening of her own heart. Neither she nor Ravi slept that night. One stared at a broken mug, the other at a silent phone. Both haunted by the same echo, a cry they couldn't unhear. The same voice binding two strangers together, miles apart. A mother who had stopped believing, and a man who never stopped listening. By morning both knew the same thing without saying it aloud. Whatever that call was, it wasn't finished. Mr. Ravi Singh, report to the HR conference room immediately. The voice crackled through the old wall speaker of his rented flat. He froze mid-sweep, mop dripping on the floor. He'd been reinstated temporarily to clear out his locker. Nothing more. So was HR calling him again. He wiped his hands, straightened his faded uniform, and walked the familiar corridors, the same ones he used to polish, until they shone. Every step felt heavier than the last. People glanced away when he passed. The news of his firing had already traveled. His presence now was an echo of shame. The door to the conference room was slightly ajar. Inside sat the CEO, immaculate as always, posture sharp, eyes sharper. A cup of untouched coffee steamed between them like a boundary neither would cross. Sit, she said. He obeyed quietly, hat in hand. I've reviewed the incident, she began, voice even but cold. You violated company protocol. You disrupted workflow on the executive floor, answered a personal call during active duty, and refused to comply come instructed. He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. I did answer the call. Good, she replied. Then we agree on the facts. Her hand tapped on a folder labeled disciplinary review. But she didn't open it. She just stared at him too long, too still. Tell me, she said finally, why would someone send me an audio recording of that call? And why? She leaned forward. Would the voice on it sound like a young woman in distress? Was that your doing? His brows furrowed. I don't understand. You don't have to pretend, she snapped. You think emotional manipulation will get you your job back? You think you can exploit tragedy for pity? He looked down, voice barely above a whisper. Ma'am, I don't know who that girl was. I only picked up because she sounded scared. That's all. Convenient, she said, her tone dipped with sarcasm. You just happened to take a call that somehow matches the voice of my missing daughter. Do you expect me to believe that? The word daughter landed like a confession she hadn't meant to give. Ravi's eyes softened. I didn't know that, ma'am. I'm sorry for your loss. She flinched, as if the words burned. I don't need your sympathy. I need honesty. I am being honest, he said quietly. The phone rang. I thought it might be one of your staff in trouble. When I answered, someone was crying. I said hello twice, and she said, help me. That's all I heard before you took it away. Her jaw tightened. So now it's my fault? No, he said, it's no one's fault, but maybe it wasn't just a mistake either. The silence that followed stretched like glass, fragile, sharp, waiting to break. She leaned back, arms crossed. Do you know what it's like to have strangers use your pain for leverage? I've seen people do it for years. Charity, headlines, sympathy. I built this company by keeping emotions out of it. I won't start now. He looked at her, not with anger, but with tired understanding. Maybe that's why it feels so empty here, he said softly. Her eyes flicked up. What did you say? He swallowed hard. You built walls, ma'am. But sometimes walls keep the wrong people out. The air changed. For the first time her confidence faltered. She opened the folder as if to distract herself, but the pages were blank, only her own reflection stared back from the glossy cover. You're dismissed, she said finally. Effective immediately, and I suggest you stop contacting anyone in this building, especially me. He stood slowly. I never wanted anything from you, ma'am, only to understand what that girl was afraid of. Her voice rose. Enough. Get out. He nodded, adjusted his cap and walked to the door. His hand paused on the handle. Without turning, he said quietly, if that call finds me again, I'll still answer, even if it costs me everything. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt final. She sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where he'd stood. Her pulse raced, her throat dry. Why did his calmness feel more powerful than her control? Why did the mention of that call make her chest ache as if something was breaking open from the inside? She told herself he was lying, that it was a coincidence, that grief was making her irrational. But when she reached for her phone, the screen lit up, same number as the recording. Unknown. Her finger hovered over answer, but she couldn't move. Not yet. Outside the building, Ravi stepped into the sunlight. The world felt louder, crueler. But somewhere inside him, determination stirred. If the girl was real, if that voice still existed somewhere out there, he would find her. Not for revenge, not for the CE, for peace. He looked back once at the tall glass windows above, her world of rules and silence. Then he whispered under his breath, "Everyone deserves to be heard." And with that he walked away, humble, steady, and alone. The CEO stayed seated, staring at her silent phone, the ghost of a young girl's plea echoing in her mind. Neither of them knew it yet, but the call wasn't done crossing worlds. It was just waiting to be answered again. By the next morning, the story had already changed hands a dozen times. In the break room, the janitor's firing had become entertainment, a whispered parable about pride, punishment, and the dangers of defying power. Someone said he shouted at the CEO. Someone else said he stole a phone. The truth didn't matter. In an office where fear wore a suit, gossip was currency. Down in the service corridor, Ravi's locker sat open, half empty, his uniform folded neatly inside. A name tag glinted in the dim light, as if waiting to be claimed by someone new. He stood there for a long time before taking it off the hook. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain. It had always calmed him before. Not today. When he reached home, the silence greeted him first. His wife was still asleep. The fan creaked overhead. He sank into the wooden chair near her bed and stared at the phone lying on the table. The same small flip phone that had started it all. He pressed redial again, even though he knew there would be no answer. Call cannot be completed. He closed it and whispered, "Then maybe she didn't make it." He didn't realize he'd said it aloud until his wife stirred and opened her eyes. "Did you lose your job again?" she asked, voice thin but steady. He smiled faintly. "Just for now." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, the kind of quiet understanding only shared between people who have already lost so much. After she drifted back to sleep, he stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. He replayed every second of that day. The ring, the voice, the fear. He could still hear her saying, "Help me," like it was etched into his skin. He didn't know her, but somehow, she didn't sound like a stranger. She sounded like someone who'd been waiting to be believed. Up in her penthouse office, the CEO sat behind her desk, perfectly composed. Meetings continued. Emails went out. No one noticed that she hadn't said a word all morning. She had already deleted the audio file, but her mind replayed it on its own. That voice, the trembling breath between words, the plea that cut through logic. It echoed like a song she couldn't stop humming. Her assistants mistook her silence for focus. They had no idea she was listening to ghosts. Everywhere she looked, the past intruded. The half-drunk cup of tea her daughter once left on the counter. The text she never replied to. The voicemail she deleted because it came during a meeting she couldn't reschedule. Work had always been her way of staying alive, the one space where pain couldn't reach her. But now the boundaries were cracking. At lunch she walked past the janitor's closet. It was locked, the mop leaning against the wall like a question mark. She stopped, staring at the bucket half filled with clean water. Something about it bothered her. The water still untouched, waiting. She couldn't explain why she felt the need to whisper, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular. When she got home that night, she poured herself a drink and stood at the window overlooking the city. Neon lights blinked far below, like 1,000 unanswered messages. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, older, lonely. For the first time in years, she wondered what her daughter would think of her now. She closed her eyes and the memories came uninvited, sharp. The last morning before her daughter vanished. She'd been running late for a board meeting. Her daughter had asked, "Can we talk tonight? It's important." And she had said without even looking up, "Not tonight, tomorrow." There was no tomorrow. That night her daughter never came home. The police had asked routine questions. Any fights? Any signs of trouble? She said no. She said they were fine. But she knew she'd been lying, not to them, but to herself. In the years that followed, she filled her life with structure. Every moment scheduled, every feeling buried. Because if she stopped moving, she'd have to face the silence her daughter left behind. And now, one man's simple act, answering a phone, had cracked the armor she'd spent half a decade building. At the same time, Ravi sat on the balcony of his small apartment, listening to the sounds of the city drifting through the night, traffic, sirens, a baby crying somewhere. He couldn't shake the thought that maybe the girl's voice was still out there, calling again, waiting for someone to pick up. He whispered to himself, "If I hear her again, I'll answer, no matter what it costs." He didn't realize that somewhere across the city, the CEO was whispering almost the same thing, not aloud, but inside her chest. Two different silences, two different kinds of guilt, but the same echo haunted them both. "Help me." And though neither of them knew it, that single plea had already begun to pull them back toward each other, like two people hearing the same song from opposite sides of the wall. The night stretched long. For one, it was the weight of regret. For the other, the ache of responsibility. But for both, it was the same unanswered call, the same voice refusing to die out. The police email arrived 3 days later, short and clinical. "We traced multiple emergency calls from an unregistered number to a shelter in the old district, possibly connected to prior distress audio. Proceed with discretion." She read it twice, her throat tightening around each word. She told no one. Not her board, not her assistant. She simply closed her laptop, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the building. For the first time in years, she didn't tell her driver where to go. She just said, "The old district, somewhere near St. Martha's shelter." The drive took nearly an hour, but her mind wasn't on the road. It was on the word that had followed her everywhere. Help. It wasn't just the sound of a stranger's panic anymore. It was a reflection, a mirror to her own voice, the one she'd silenced years ago when she convinced herself she didn't need saving. The car stopped in front of a worn-out building with a flickering sign. "St. Martha's Women's Shelter. Hope lives here." She hesitated before stepping out. She had built empires from glass and steel, yet she felt smaller than the peeling paint before her. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and bread. A group of women sat in a circle, one reading softly from a worn paperback. In the corner, a little girl colored quietly on the floor. No one recognized her, and she preferred it that way. For once, she wasn't the CEO, just a woman trying to find something she'd lost. "Can I help you?" a volunteer asked gently. "I'm looking for someone," she replied. "A girl who made a call recently. She said she needed help." The woman's face softened. "We get many like her. You'll have to be more specific." Before she could respond, a familiar voice drifted from the back of the room. "I'll take care of it, ma'am. Don't worry. She's safe now." Her breath caught. That voice. She turned, and there he was. Ravi, wearing the same uniform, sleeves rolled up, crouched beside a frightened young woman who clutched a torn backpack like armor. He was speaking to her softly, almost whispering. "It's okay. You're safe here. No one's going to take your phone again." The girl nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. For a moment, the CEO couldn't speak. She just watched the man she'd humiliated comforting a stranger with the gentleness she'd long forgotten existed. When their eyes finally met, he froze. The kindness on his face shifted into something cautious, not anger, but disbelief. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. She took a step forward. "I could ask you the same." He looked back at the young woman, then at her. "They come here sometimes. They need help. Cleaning, repairs, food drives. It's not much." His tone wasn't defensive. It was humble, factual. "I thought you'd be looking for another job," she said. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes people need fixing more than places." Her gaze fell to the girl beside him, trembling, eyes darting, the same fear she'd heard in the recording. "Is that her?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "No, but she's just like the one who called." Something in his voice made her look closer. The compassion wasn't pity, it was recognition. He saw brokenness not as weakness, but as proof of being human. They stood there in silence for a while, watching the girl slowly calm down. Ravi handed her a cup of tea, and waited until her hands stopped shaking before speaking again. "You should eat something," he said gently. "Fear fades faster when you're warm." The girl managed a faint smile. The CEO felt something she hadn't in years. Envy, not of his job but of his ability to reach people, to make them feel seen. For her, connection had always been a transaction. For him, it was an act of grace. When the girl was led away by the volunteers, the two of them remained by the doorway. "I shouldn't have come here," she said quietly. "It wasn't my place." He looked at her, eyes tired but kind. Sometimes you have to go where the noise stops. That's where the truth hides. She exhaled slowly. I thought I had everything under control. Turns out I've been running from something I couldn't bury. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. The one thing she realized no one ever did for her anymore. After a long pause, she said, "That night, when you answered the call, did she say anything else?" He shook his head. "Just that one word. Help." Her eyes glistened. "She said it like that too, when she was little." Ravi's expression softened. "Then maybe it really was her, ma'am." The word maybe landed like a spark in her chest. Small, fragile, but alive. As she turned to leave, she stopped at the door. "Ravi?" "Yes, ma'am." "If you hear that voice again," she hesitated, voice trembling, "don't hang up. Even if I'm the one who tells you to." He nodded slowly. "I won't." Outside, dusk settled over the city. The air carried the smell of rain. For the first time in years, she didn't rush back to work. She just stood there, letting silence fill the space where control used to live. Behind her, Ravi watched from the shelter doorway, wondering how someone with everything could look so lost. And for a fleeting moment he felt the faint pull of empathy go both ways, from the woman who once fired him to the man she'd dismissed. Neither spoke again that night, but something unspoken passed between them. Not apology, not forgiveness, just a shared understanding that sometimes the hardest thing isn't answering a call, it's hearing it. And in that quiet, the first bridge between them began to form, built not from words but from the same echo that haunted them both. Help. It started quietly. No official meetings, no schedules, no memos. Just two people showing up after hours when the city went still. The CEO would park a few streets away from the shelter to avoid attention. She stopped wearing her tailored suits, replaced her heels with sneakers. The first night she came, Ravi thought she'd changed her mind, that maybe guilt had driven her here. But she didn't come to apologize. She came to listen. They sat in the corner of the shelter's storage room, surrounded by donated blankets and boxes of instant noodles. Between them, a laptop glowed with open spreadsheets, call logs, and scraps of information that didn't seem to connect, except for one number that appeared over and over again, always disconnected, always the same brief burst of signal. "I've traced it to 3 locations so far," she said, pointing at the map. "Public payphones. 2 near bus terminals, 1 outside a hospital." Ravi leaned closer, brow furrowing. She could be moving around, maybe afraid someone's tracking her. The CEO nodded. "That would explain the disposable SIM cards. She doesn't want to be found, but she still wants to be heard." They exchanged a glance that said more than words could. Both of them knew what it meant to want to be heard. In the following nights, they began visiting those locations together, quietly, almost like ghosts retracing a path of pain. The first payphone was rusted, its receiver missing. The second one had been painted over, but the third still worked, barely. She stared at it for a long time, fingertips brushing the cracked plastic. "This might be the last place she called from," she whispered. Ravi didn't interrupt. He just stood beside her, steady and silent, the kind of presence that didn't need words to feel strong. They returned to the shelter each night, jotting notes, reviewing timelines. It became a rhythm, her mind solving, his heart steadying. Over cups of cheap tea she began to speak in fragments, not as a boss but as a mother. She used to draw on napkins, she said once, tracing invisible lines on the table. Tiny houses. She said she wanted to build one where everyone could stay, even strangers. Ravi smiled softly. "Sounds like she already knew what kindness looks like." "She learned it from her father," she said, almost smiling. "Not me. I was too busy proving myself." He didn't argue, just said, "We all build our houses differently. Some with bricks, some with time." That line stayed with her for days. In return, he began sharing pieces of his own story, his wife's slow illness, the years of caretaking, the helplessness that never really leaves even after the pain ends. "I used to think love meant fixing everything," he said. "Then I realized sometimes love is just sitting beside someone while it breaks." She looked at him, eyes tired, gentle, and realized she'd never known anyone who could turn sorrow into wisdom so quietly. Their sessions stretched later and later. The staff at the shelter began leaving them tea without asking questions. A rhythm formed between them. She'd handle the logistics and data. He'd handle the people, coaxing witnesses to open up. When one frightened runaway refused to speak to anyone, he simply sat nearby, repairing a broken chair, until she began to talk on her own. The CEO watched this with quiet awe. For years she had managed people with fear. He did it with presence. One night, as rain drummed softly against the windows, she said, "You could have walked away from all this, Ravi. Why stay?" He looked at her for a long moment, then replied, "Because someone has to keep answering, even if no one listens." That line hit her harder than she expected. Because for the first time she saw herself not as the victim of loss, but as one of the people who had stopped listening. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small photograph, worn, edges bent. "This is her," she said, sliding it across the table. He studied the picture of a laughing teenage girl holding a paintbrush. "She looks fearless," he said. "She was," the CEO whispered, "until I taught her that fear was weakness." For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said gently, "Maybe she was just trying to show you that fear means you still care." She didn't reply, but tears welled up silently. The weeks passed. They pieced together fragments, sightings, phone records, shelter notes, all pointing towards something real. A trail. But more than that, something else began to rebuild. Trust. The woman who once dismissed him now asked his opinion before making a move. The man who once bowed in silence now met her eyes without hesitation. There were no titles anymore. No ma'am, no sir. Only two people trying to fix what silence had broken. On one of their last nights together before the storm that would test everything, they sat on the shelter's steps, watching the city lights flicker in the rain. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "why it had to be you who answered that call?" Ravi smiled faintly. Maybe she called the person who still believes someone will pick up. She looked at him, the corner of her lips trembling into a small smile, her first in years. For a long while they sat in comfortable quiet, the kind that didn't demand explanation. Inside, the shelter lights dimmed. Outside, the world felt slightly less cruel. It was the first time in years she felt safe in silence. Because this one wasn't empty. It was shared, and without realizing it, both had begun to heal. One from guilt, the other from grief, through the simplest act of all: listening. The first rumor appeared as a whisper in the elevator. Light, casual, poisonous. By the end of the week, it had reached the boardroom. "Have you heard?" one executive murmured. "She's been spending nights downtown, with the janitor she fired." They said it like a scandal, a joke passed between expensive suits. Another added, "She's losing control, personal issues affecting performance. You know how grief makes people unstable." No one dared to say it to her face. They didn't have to. In a place where reputation was everything, whispers were sharper than knives. By Monday morning, the CEO could feel it in every corridor, the shift in glances, the forced smiles, the way conversations ended when she entered a room. Her assistant's eyes avoided hers. The air had turned thin. In the board meeting, one of the directors cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're concerned about recent behavior." She didn't flinch. "Be specific." He exchanged a look with the others. "You've been missing meetings. Your phone activity shows irregular hours. Security logged you entering company premises at night, and there are reports you've been associating with terminated staff." Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers tightened on the pen. "Are you suggesting compassion is a policy violation?" "No, ma'am," he said carefully, "but favoritism is." She felt something cold sink in her chest. They didn't care about her grief. They didn't care about the call. All they cared about was control, the very thing she had once used to survive. Another voice spoke. "The shareholders are watching closely. If this continues, we'll have to consider leadership adjustments." There it was, the threat, polite but final. That night she met Ravi at the shelter as usual. He was bent over a folder, tracing patterns on the call logs they'd collected. He looked up with his usual calm smile. "I think I found a lid," he said. "The same number pinged near a bus terminal 2 nights ago. Maybe she's trying again." But her face was pale, strained. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, then said quietly, "They know." He frowned. "The board. They think I've lost control. They think you're manipulating me." He leaned back slowly, processing her words. "So, what happens now?" She looked away. "If I don't act, they'll fire us both, and everything we've done will be erased." "Act to how?" "Officially," she said, forcing the words out. "I have to end this collaboration. You can't come here anymore." He blinked. "You're serious?" Her voice cracked, just slightly. "I have no choice." He stared at her, the same woman who once called him a nobody, now speaking like someone breaking her own rules. "No choice?" he said quietly. "There's always a choice, ma'am. You just have to decide who you're protecting." "I am protecting you," she said, too fast. "They'd destroy you if they thought we were still in contact. This is the only way." For a moment, The shelter felt colder. He nodded slowly. I see. So this is about survival again. She reached out as if to stop him. Ravi, please. But he stepped back. Don't worry, ma'am. You won't have to defend me anymore. You can go back to your world. I'll stay in mine. He left the folder on the table and walked out into the rain without looking back. She stood there frozen, listening to the door close. The following days were a blur. Meetings resumed. Emails poured in. The company released a statement about maintaining professional boundaries. Inside, she felt hollow. The moral strength she'd built in those quiet nights at the shelter had been replaced by the same cold armor she once wore. People congratulated her for getting back on track. She smiled on cue. She spoke in metrics and forecasts. But every word felt rehearsed, like she was speaking a language she no longer believed in. The folder Ravi left sat untouched on her desk for 3 days. When she finally opened it, there was a single note on the last page, written in neat handwriting. If she calls again, answer. Not as a CEO, but as a mother. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her drawer. That night, she sat in her office long after everyone had gone home. The city lights outside blinked like signals she couldn't decode. For the first time in weeks, she was truly alone. The phone on her desk buzzed once, then again, then a third time. Unknown number. Same digits. Her breath caught. Her hand hovered over the screen. All she had to do was press answer. But fear froze her. What if it wasn't her? What if it was? What if she had to hear that voice again begging for help and this time she couldn't do anything? The phone kept ringing. Each vibration felt like a heartbeat. Then, just before it stopped, she whispered, "I'm sorry," and let it go silent. When the call ended, she sat back and closed her eyes. The sound of rain filled the room, gentle and accusing. For the first time in her life, she realized something devastating. Power had never protected her. It had only kept her from answering the calls that mattered most. Across town, Ravi stood beneath a broken streetlight outside the bus terminal, watching people come and go. The folder she'd given him was gone, but he still carried the phone, waiting, hoping, listening. When his old flip phone buzzed with a single missed call notification, he opened it quickly. Same number. He whispered into the night. She called again, didn't she? No one answered, but the wind seemed to nod. He looked toward the city skyline, toward the glass tower where she sat alone, and said quietly, "You can't keep running forever." The rain began to fall harder, washing over everything, the shelter, the streets, the silence between them. And somewhere within that storm, one call remained unanswered, hovering like a bridge half-built between two hearts too afraid to cross. The voicemail came at 2. She hadn't been able to sleep. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the world outside her window still looked drenched, streets glistening under pale streetlights, the city breathing in slow exhaustion. She sat on the couch, laptop open, her mind cycling through all the decisions that had led her here. When the first vibration buzzed across the glass table, she didn't move. Just stared. Another buzz. Then another. Unknown number. Her body went still. This time, no ring, just a notification, one new voicemail. Her pulse quickened. She waited, almost afraid to press play. And when she finally did, the world seemed to hold its breath. The recording began with static, soft, uneven, like rain on old tape. Then a voice. Shaky, tired, but unmistakably human.
"Hi, I don't know if this number still works,"
the girl said, her voice trembling on the edges. "I tried calling before. I don't know if you got it. Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't." The CEO froze. Her heart stumbled. She knew that voice. Even older, strained by years, it carried the same fragile melody she once soothed to sleep. "I just wanted to say, I'm okay. I'm safe now. I've been getting help." Her vision blurred. The room felt smaller, the air too thick to breathe. The girl paused on the line, exhaling shakily. "I'm in a rehab program outside the city. They gave me a new name. Said it's better that way. So, if you're looking for me, you might not find me under the one you remember." The CEO's hands covered her mouth, a broken sound escaping between her fingers. "I didn't mean to disappear," the voice continued. "I was scared. I didn't think you'd understand what I was going through. You were always so strong, so sure. I felt like, if I broke, you'd stop loving me." Her heart clenched. She whispered into the quiet, No, I never stopped." But the voicemail didn't wait. "I called months ago, from a payphone. I thought maybe I could just hear your voice, but someone else answered. A man. He sounded kind. I asked for help and he said, "You're not alone." The CEO pressed her hand to her chest. "Ravi," the voice continued, softer now. "Whoever he was, please tell him thank you. He didn't hang up. He didn't make me feel like a mistake." Tears slid freely now, unchecked, falling onto the sleeve of her shirt. Her whole body trembled. "I know I hurt you," the girl said, "but I'm trying to get better. I want to come home someday. Just not yet. I need to learn how to live again first." There was a long pause, filled only with her breathing. Then one final sentence barely above a whisper. "Tell Mom, I never stopped calling." The message ended. The room went silent, except for her own sobs. She collapsed forward, clutching the phone to her chest as if holding the voice itself. 5 years of silence. 5 years of pretending strength, undone by a minute and 27 seconds of sound. She slid onto the floor, shaking, the weight of every decision pressing down like gravity. Ravi had been right. He had heard her daughter when she hadn't. While she chased control, a stranger had offered kindness, the kind she should have given herself. She whispered his name through tears. Ravi. When morning came, she didn't go to work. For the first time, she didn't care what the headline said, or what the board would think. She drove across town to the shelter, phone still clutched in her hand like a fragile truth. The sun hadn't fully risen, mist hung low over the street. The shelter door was half open. Inside, a few volunteers moved quietly, stacking donated clothes. She asked the first one she saw, "Is Ravi here?" The woman shook her head. "He hasn't come in since last week." Her chest sank. "Do you know where he went?" "I think he's been helping near the bus station again." Said he was waiting for someone. The bus station. The place from the call logs. Of course. She found him that evening near the terminal, sitting on a bench, repairing an old umbrella with string. The rain threatened again. Sky bruised gray. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering before recognition softened his face. "Ma'am," he said, standing awkwardly, "you shouldn't be here." "I got a voicemail," she said, her voice shaking. "From her." He blinked. "Her?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "My daughter, she's alive." For the first time, his calm cracked into astonishment. "Alive?" "She's in a rehab program outside the city. She used a new name." She said she swallowed hard. "She said she called months ago, from a payphone. That you answered." He went still. The wind picked up, carrying her words into the hum of the terminal. "She thanked you," the CEO continued softly. "She said you told her she wasn't alone." Ravi lowered his head. For a moment he said nothing, just stared at the ground. Then he whispered, "I didn't even know who she was. I just couldn't hang up." She stepped closer. "You did what I couldn't. You listened." The words broke something open in her, not pain this time, but release. For 5 years she'd carried guilt like armor. Now it fell away, heavy and unneeded. Ravi shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, I'm glad she's alive, but I didn't save her. She found the courage herself." She smiled through tears. "Maybe, but she needed someone to remind her that courage still existed in the world." He looked at her, not as an employee, not as a superior, but as another human being standing in the rain. "You did the hardest part," he said quietly. "You listened, even when it hurt." They sat on the bench together as the drizzle began. She replayed the voicemail for him, both of them listening to that fragile voice echo between them. When the message ended, neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she said, "I thought success would make me feel safe, but it only made me deaf." He glanced at her. "Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's punishment." She nodded, eyes distant. "I think I'm ready to stop punishing myself." For a brief moment he smiled. "Then maybe this is the beginning." That night she returned to her office, soaked but lighter. The board had already called 3 times. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened her computer, found the old missing person case, and typed one line into the notes section. "Case closed, found alive." Then she added another. "Lesson learned. Some calls are worth losing everything to answer." The next morning she sent a single company-wide email, not about profits or performance but about empathy. She wrote, "If someone asks for help, no matter their title, status, or past, listen. We are not defined by what we build, but by what we choose to hear." Across town, Ravi received a message from her phone number. It was short. "She's alive. Thank you, I'm sorry." He smiled faintly, folded the message into his heart, and whispered to no one, "Told you she'd answer eventually." That evening, as twilight settled, she drove to the edge of the city where the rehab center stood. She didn't go inside, not yet. She just sat in the car, watching the windows glow softly in the distance. Her phone buzzed again, a new message, a different number. A photo came through, a hand-drawn sketch on a napkin, a small house, the kind her daughter used to draw. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, tears returning, but this time they were different. Not heavy. Healing. And as the night closed around her, she whispered into the quiet, "I'm here, sweetheart. I hear you now." For the first time in 5 years, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like listening. It felt like redemption. The annual shareholder meeting was supposed to be a victory lap. A celebration of profits, new contracts, and expansion. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and ambition. Every seat filled, every camera live. The CEO stood backstage, holding the speech her assistant had prepared. It was perfect on paper, numbers, vision, applause lines. But in her hands it felt hollow, the same kind of silence that had once was her daughter's voice. She looked at her reflection in the glass door. For years she'd worn the same armor, perfection stitched over guilt. But today, she didn't want to wear it anymore. Her assistant leaned in, whispering, "They're ready for you, ma'am." She nodded, slipped the paper into her pocket, and walked toward the light. Applause greeted her. Cameras flashed. Her face appeared on the giant screen behind her, confident as ever. She thanked the crowd, spoke the first few lines, and then paused. The room waited. She looked at the teleprompter. The next line read, "Our success is built on discipline and excellence." But her heart was somewhere else entirely. She closed the laptop in front of her. The microphones picked up the soft click. "Before we continue," she said, her voice steady but low, "there's something I need to say, something that doesn't belong in this report, but belongs to the truth." A ripple of confusion moved through the audience. She took a breath. 5 years ago, my daughter disappeared. Some of you know the story. Most of you don't. What you don't know is how I lost her long before she went missing. The murmurs grew louder. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "I lost her the moment I stopped listening." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "I built this company to fill the silence she left behind. And somewhere along the way, I began believing that order mattered more than understanding, that rules mattered more than people." The crowd fell completely silent now. "A few months ago," she continued, "I fired an employee for answering a phone call during his shift. I thought it was insubordination. In truth, it was compassion." Every camera lens turned sharper. Her assistant looked terrified. "The call," she said slowly, "came from a young woman in distress. The man I fired," Ravi Singh picked up because he heard fear in her voice. "I ended the call, I humiliated him, and I learned later that the voice on the other end was my daughter's." Gasps rippled through the hall. The CFO leaned forward, whispering to a board member. Others simply stared, unsure if this was bravery or breakdown. She pressed on. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want honesty." The man I dismissed showed more integrity in one moment of instinct than I did in years of leadership. Her throat tightened, but her gaze stayed level. "So today, I'm reinstating him, not as a janitor but as this company's first community liaison officer. His job will be to remind us that success without empathy is failure wearing a suit." The applause began hesitantly, one person, then another, until it grew into a steady wave. But she wasn't finished. "And to the people watching from home, the shareholders, the staff, the strangers online, I want you to hear this clearly. Humility doesn't weaken leadership. It defines it. If you have power, use it to listen." Her voice softened. "I stopped listening once. It cost me my family. I won't make that mistake again." When she stepped back, the applause turned into something else, not the loud, performative kind that fills a room, but the slow, respectful kind that fills a soul. At the back of the hall, Ravi stood in his old uniform, invited at her request but unannounced. He had tried to refuse, but the shelter staff convinced him to come. He hadn't expected any of this. When she spotted him, she stepped down from the stage, heels clicking against marble, the crowd parting instinctively. Every camera followed her. The symbol of corporate perfection walking toward the man she'd once treated as invisible. She stopped in front of him. He looked startled, uncomfortable under the spotlight. "Ravi Singh," she said, her voice carrying through the mic, "I owe you more than an apology. You reminded me what it means to be human, and I hope you'll forgive me, not as your former boss, but as a mother who lost her way." The entire hall held its breath. He said nothing. Instead, he removed his cap and gave a small, quiet nod. The kind of forgiveness that doesn't need words. And somehow that silence meant more than any speech could. The press captured every frame. The woman of power kneeling, head bowed. The man of humility standing tall. A reversal so complete it felt biblical, the kind of moment people rewatch not for scandal but for hope. Reporters would later write headlines like, CEO breaks down at shareholder summit, reinstates fired janitor in emotional apology. Power kneels to compassion. But inside that hall, it didn't feel like a headline. It felt like release. Afterward, as the room emptied and the applause faded, she approached him once more in the quiet. You didn't have to forgive me, she said. He smiled faintly. Forgiveness isn't for you, ma'am. It's for peace. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Do you think she'll forgive me too? He thought for a moment. She already has. She called, didn't she? She smiled, small, genuine. Yes, she did. They stood in silence, both looking up at the stage they'd just left behind, the place where arrogance had fallen and empathy had risen. For the first time her shoulders didn't feel heavy. And when she finally looked back at him she said softly, "Thank you, Ravi, for answering." He replied simply, "Always." Outside, journalists waited by the doors, cameras flashing as she and Ravi stepped into the rain. She didn't shield herself this time. She let it fall, the sky washing away the last traces of the woman who once hid behind control. A reporter shouted, "Ma'am, what message do you have for other CEOs watching this?" She turned briefly and said, "Listen before you lead." And then she walked on beside, not ahead of the man who had taught her how. That night, clips of the event flooded social media. Some called it brave, some called it staged, but most called it human. Among the thousands of comments, one stood out. From a user with a new profile name, no photo. "She finally heard me, thank you both." The CEO saw it, smiled through tears and whispered to herself, "I hear you, sweetheart. I'll never stop listening again." For the first time in years she turned off her phone, not out of avoidance but peace. And as the rain outside slowed to a gentle rhythm, she felt the world settle back into balance. Not the cold, rigid balance of control, but the warm, breathing kind that comes when truth and kindness finally share the same space. The universe hadn't punished her. It had humbled her. And in doing so, it had set her free. The annual shareholder meeting was supposed to be a victory lap. A celebration of profits, new contracts, and expansion. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and ambition. Every seat filled, every camera live. The CEO stood backstage, holding the speech her assistant had prepared. It was perfect on paper, numbers, vision, applause lines. But in her hands it felt hollow, the same kind of silence that had once swallowed her daughter's voice. She looked at her reflection in the glass door. For years she'd worn the same armor, perfection stitched over guilt. But today she didn't want to wear it anymore. Her assistant leaned in, whispering, "They're ready for you, ma'am." She nodded, slipped the paper into her pocket, and walked toward the light. Applause greeted her. Cameras flashed. Her face appeared on the giant screen behind her, confident as ever. She thanked the crowd, spoke the first few lines, and then paused. The room waited. She looked at the teleprompter. The next line read, "Our success is built on discipline and excellence." But her heart was somewhere else entirely. She closed the laptop in front of her. The microphones picked up the soft click. "Before we continue," she said, her voice steady but low, "there's something I need to say, something that doesn't belong in this report, but belongs to the truth." A ripple of confusion moved through the audience. She took a breath. 5 years ago, my daughter disappeared. Some of you know the story. Most of you don't. What you don't know is how I lost her long before she went missing. The murmurs grew louder. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "I lost her the moment I stopped listening." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "I built this company to fill the silence she left behind. And somewhere along the way I began believing that order mattered more than understanding, that rules mattered more than people." The crowd fell completely silent now. "A few months ago," she continued, "I fired an employee for answering a phone call during his shift. I thought it was insubordination. In truth, it was compassion." Every camera lens turned sharper. Her assistant looked terrified. "The call," she said slowly, "came from a young woman in distress. The man I fired," Ravi Singh picked up because he heard fear in her voice. "I ended the call, I humiliated him. And I learned later that the voice on the other end was my daughter's." Gasps rippled through the hall. The CFO leaned forward, whispering to a board member. Others simply stared, unsure if this was bravery or breakdown. She pressed on. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want honesty. The man I dismissed showed more integrity in one moment of instinct than I did in years of leadership. Her throat tightened, but her gaze stayed level. So today, I'm reinstating him, not as a janitor, but as this company's first community liaison officer. His job will be to remind us that success without empathy is failure wearing a suit. The applause began hesitantly, one person, then another until it grew into a steady wave. But she wasn't finished. And to the people watching from home, the shareholders, the staff, the strangers online, I want you to hear this clearly. Humility doesn't weaken leadership. It defines it. If you have power, use it to listen. Her voice softened. I stopped listening once. It cost me my family. I won't make that mistake again. When she stepped back, the applause turned into something else. Not the loud, performative kind that fills a room, but the slow, respectful kind that fills a soul. At the back of the hall, Ravi stood in his old uniform, invited at her request but unannounced. He had tried to refuse, but the shelter staff convinced him to come. He hadn't expected any of this. When she spotted him, she stepped down from the stage, heels clicking against marble, the crowd parting instinctively. Every camera followed her. The symbol of corporate perfection, walking toward the man she'd once treated as invisible. She stopped in front of him. He looked startled, uncomfortable under the spotlight. Ravi Singh, she said, her voice carrying through the mic. I owe you more than an apology. You reminded me what it means to be human. And I hope you'll forgive me not as your former boss, but as a mother who lost her way. The entire hall held its breath. He said nothing. Instead, he removed his cap and gave a small, quiet nod. The kind of forgiveness that doesn't need words. And somehow that silence meant more than any speech could. The press captured every frame. The woman of power kneeling, head bowed. The man of humility standing tall. A reversal so complete it felt biblical. The kind of moment people rewatch not for scandal but for hope. Reporters would later write headlines like, CEO breaks down at shareholder summit. Reinstates fired janitor in emotional apology. Power kneels to compassion. But inside that hall, it didn't feel like a headline. It felt like release. Afterward, as the room emptied and the applause faded, she approached him once more in the quiet. You didn't have to forgive me, she said. He smiled faintly. Forgiveness isn't for you, ma'am. It's for peace. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Do you think she'll forgive me too? He thought for a moment. She already has. She called, didn't she? She smiled. Small, genuine. Yes, she did. They stood in silence, both looking up at the stage they'd just left behind, the place where arrogance had fallen, and empathy had risen. For the first time, her shoulders didn't feel heavy. And when she finally looked back at him, she said softly, Thank you, Ravi, for answering. He replied simply, Always. Outside, journalists waited by the doors, cameras flashing as she and Ravi stepped into the rain. She didn't shield herself this time. She let it fall, the sky washing away the last traces of the woman who once hid behind control. A reporter shouted, Ma'am, what message do you have for other CEOs watching this? She turned briefly and said, Listen before you lead. And then she walked on, beside not ahead of the man who had taught her how. That night, clips of the event flooded social media. Some called it brave, some called it staged, but most called it human. Among the thousands of comments, one stood out. From a user with a new profile name, no photo. She finally heard me. Thank you both. The CEO saw it, smiled through tears, and whispered to herself, I hear you, sweetheart. I'll never stop listening again. For the first time in years, she turned off her phone, not out of avoidance but peace. And as the rain outside slowed to a gentle rhythm, she felt the world settle back into balance, not the cold, rigid balance of control, but the warm, breathing kind that comes when truth and kindness finally share the same space. The universe hadn't punished her. It had humbled her, and in doing so it had set her free. The first letter arrived quietly, folded into an envelope that had no return address. She recognized the handwriting instantly, small, rounded, uneven at the edges, as if written by someone still relearning how to hold a pen. They say recovery takes time. I'm learning to believe them. If you still want to see me, I think I'm ready. No grand declaration, no promises, just that one small line that broke her open. 2 weeks later, she stood outside the rehabilitation center. It wasn't what she expected, no white walls or sterile air, just an old building surrounded by jacaranda trees in bloom. The guard recognized her name from the appointment list and pointed her down a narrow hallway. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door. For 5 years she had imagined this moment, rehearsed what she'd say, how she'd fall to her knees, how her daughter would forgive her instantly. But now that she was here, the words dissolved. The door opened from the inside, and there she was. Older, thinner, her hair shorter, her eyes gentler, carrying the kind of strength that comes only from breaking and rebuilding. They stood facing each other, both motionless, as if afraid one would disappear if the other blinked. Neither spoke first. The air between them was heavy with everything they hadn't said, apologies, memories, all the lost years pressing close. Finally her daughter stepped forward and whispered, "Hi, Mom." The word mom cracked through her like sunlight after endless rain. She reached out, not to pull her in but to touch her arm, light, uncertain, reverent. And when her daughter didn't pull away, she finally exhaled the breath she'd been holding for half a decade. Then they hugged. It wasn't cinematic. There were no perfect words, no soaring music, just two hearts, bruised but still beating, finding their rhythm again. She cried, not the composed tears she used to hide in boardrooms, but the kind that come from the soul's marrow. Her daughter cried too, whispering, "I didn't think you'd want me anymore." And she answered through tears, "You were never the one who left, I did." They stood like that for a long time. No one interrupted, no explanations, no blame, just forgiveness, not spoken but felt. When they finally sat down, her daughter began to talk about the months after she ran away, the people who helped her, the loneliness that never quite left. "I was so angry," she admitted. "At you, at myself, at everything. I thought if I disappeared maybe you'd stop expecting me to be perfect." Her mother smiled sadly. "I only wanted you to be safe." "I know," the girl said softly. "But safe and seen aren't the same thing." The words hit deep. She reached across the table, took her daughter's hand and said, "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you feel both." Outside the center, a familiar voice greeted them. Ravi stood under the shade of a tree holding a paper bag. "Excuse me," he said awkwardly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just brought something." Her daughter's eyes widened. "You're the man from the phone." He nodded with a shy smile. "Seems that way. You scared me that day, you know." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "You scared me too." He handed her the bag. Inside was a small potted plant, green, alive, roots wrapped in damp soil. "It's called peace lily," he said. "Tough little thing. It grows even in bad weather." She looked at him, then at her mother, and smiled. "Then it'll fit right in with us." The three of them stood there, not needing to fill the silence. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. In the weeks that followed, life began to take a quieter shape. The CEO returned to work, but something fundamental had shifted. The same hallways that once echoed with tension now felt softer. Employees noticed she stopped walking so fast. She started greeting people by name, not out of obligation but out of genuine curiosity. She replaced the company's motto on the lobby wall. Where it once read "efficiency above all," it now said, "We hear you." Ravi became the first community liaison officer, a title that made him laugh. "I'm still just cleaning up," he'd say, but now he was cleaning something deeper, the invisible dust of indifference that had settled over the place for years. He organized weekly volunteer programs at the shelter. Soon, executives who had never stepped outside their comfort zones were serving meals beside janitors, sharing stories that blurred hierarchy. The transformation wasn't loud. It was steady, human, real. The company's profits didn't drop. In fact, they grew, but not in numbers alone. They grew in loyalty, respect, purpose, because somewhere along the line, people stopped working for her and started working with her. One afternoon, as she was reviewing a report, her daughter walked into her office, nervous but smiling. "I got accepted into the counseling program," she said. "They want me to help other teens who ran away." Her mother's eyes filled with pride. "You're turning pain into light." Her daughter grinned. "Guess I learned that from you, eventually." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart. I learned it from you." That weekend they visited the shelter together. The same place where it all began, where silence turned into understanding. Ravi greeted them with tea and the same gentle calm that had once steadied her own chaos. As they sat in the courtyard, her daughter touched the peace lily they'd planted weeks ago. Its leaves had grown wide and strong. "It's thriving," she said. Ravi nodded. "Because it was given space to heal." The CEO smiled at that, because that was all any of them had needed. Not perfection, not power, just space. When they left the shelter that day, the sun was setting behind the city skyline. Her daughter leaned against her shoulder as they walked. "You know," she said softly, "when I called that day I didn't expect anyone to answer, but he did, and then you did. Eventually." Her mother squeezed her hand. "I heard you too late, but I'll never stop listening again." They walked on in silence, a silence that no longer hurt, because this one was full, the kind that follows forgiveness, the kind that hums with peace, the kind that says we made it. Back at the company, a small framed photo now hung in her office. 3 people standing under a jacaranda tree, a mother, a daughter and a janitor holding a plant between them. No awards, no titles, just life, alive again. The caption beneath it read, "Some calls don't end. They just keep teaching us how to answer." 1 year later, the ballroom of the same company shimmered again with light. But this time the air was different. The stage that once celebrated numbers now honored something weightless, a story that had started with a single call and ended with a lesson that outlived profit. The banners read, "The call that changed everything." No one had suggested the title. It simply became the truth. The annual gala wasn't just another corporate gathering anymore. It had transformed into a charity event, the proceeds going toward a new foundation, the Listening Fund, created to help families of missing persons reconnect, rebuild, and heal. At the center of it all sat 2 people who had rewritten the company's story, a woman in a simple navy gown and a man in a neatly pressed uniform that bore a new badge, Community Liaison Officer, the CEO and the janitor. Once a headline, now a partnership. The lights dimmed, and the announcer's voice filled the room. "Tonight we honor not a product, not a profit, but a principle, the courage to listen." Applause rose, warm and genuine. The CEO stepped up to the podium. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need them anymore. Her words came easily now, not rehearsed, just real. "Last year," she began, "I stood on this same stage and told you the truth about my failure. What I didn't tell you was how that failure became the door to everything I understand today." She turned slightly toward the man sitting in the front row. "Someone once taught me that listening isn't just something you do with your ears. It's something you do with your heart. And because of that lesson, lives were changed. Mine most of all." The cameras panned to Ravi, who shifted uncomfortably but smiled when the audience applauded. She continued, voice steady and bright. "The foundation we launched tonight is not in my name. It's in his, and in the name of every ordinary person who chooses compassion over convenience." The applause deepened, slow, rhythmic, filled with respect. When it was Ravi's turn to speak, he walked to the stage awkwardly, still more at home with a broom than a microphone. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the rows of expensive suits and glowing screens. "I never thought I'd be standing here," he said, voice quiet but sure. "I used to think people like me weren't meant to be heard. We just kept the lights on while others spoke." A small smile tugged at his lips, but sometimes the smallest sound, like a phone ringing, can change everything, because it's not the loud ones who change the world. It's the ones who decide to answer. The room went still. Even the cameras seemed to pause. He looked toward the CEO. "And I didn't do it alone. She taught me something too, that even the strongest walls can fall when you let empathy in. That leadership isn't about being followed. It's about seeing." He stepped back, nodding humbly as applause swelled again. Louder now, but still sincere, not for spectacle but for humanity. Later that evening, the CEO's daughter arrived quietly at the back of the hall. She wasn't announced or photographed. She didn't need to be. She walked straight to the table where her mother and Ravi sat and slipped into the empty chair beside them. When her mother turned and saw her, their eyes met, and that was enough. The girl reached across and placed her hand gently on the table, fingers brushing her mother's. Ravi smiled, the kind of smile that says you made it home. No words were exchanged. They didn't need any. The ceremony ended with a short film projected across the room. Clips of volunteers, families reunited, letters from people the foundation had helped. The final frame was simple, a still image of an old payphone, glowing softly under a streetlight, with the words, "Some calls never stop ringing. They just wait for us to listen." As the audience rose to their feet, the CEO closed her eyes for a brief second. She could almost hear it, that faint echo of a girl's voice, saying "Help me," no longer desperate, just distant and peaceful. The echo that had once haunted her now felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. Outside after the event, the 3 of them, mother, daughter and Ravi, stepped into the cool night air. The city hummed softly around them, alive with lights and stories. Ravi looked up at the sky. "Strange," he said. "A year ago none of us even knew each other." Her daughter smiled. We were connected before we met. Just didn't know it yet. The CEO looked at them both, the man who reminded her of compassion, the daughter who reminded her of grace, and said, "That call didn't just change us. It reminded the world that kindness still matters." They walked toward the parking lot slowly, laughter weaving through the night like a thread. Later, back in her office, the CEO stood by the window looking out over the city lights. The company's new motto glowed from the building's facade. "We hear you." On her desk, the peace lily Ravi had given them stood tall, its leaves shining under the lamplight. Next to it lay a framed photo, her daughter and Ravi, standing under the jacaranda trees, smiling. She reached for her phone one last time that night. No missed calls, no messages, just quiet. But this silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peace. Sometimes the loudest moments in life aren't the ones that make headlines. They're the ones that whisper truth into our hearts when we finally stop running. Listening is an act of courage. Forgiveness is an act of strength. And compassion, it's what keeps the world human. A long pause. Then the final line, gentle and familiar. "Tell us where you're watching from, and one word that describes how this story made you feel." The screen fades to black, but the sound lingers. A single phone ring in the distance. Soft, calm, alive. Not a cry for help this time. Just a reminder. Some calls change lives. Some calls change us. And the best ones never really end.